For the past 19 years, on the same date, no matter my address or assumed identity, I've received a deeply unsettling envelope. We all have a past, some of us a darker one than others, and while time presumably heals all wounds, it will leave behind deep scars that'll never truly disappear. Around this time of year, I always seem to revisit these lesions of old, fathomless gashes of misery and self-loathing. On a psychological level, I believe it all boils down to an envelope I received 19 years ago, the content of which is one of the reasons I relocate at least once a year. It never seems to help. No matter the identity I mask behind, no matter where I am in the world, the accursed envelope always finds the right mailbox. This should make me paranoid, anxious, and terrified. Instead, it turns me into an alcoholic pseudo-philosopher. I'd been drinking for days, possibly weeks. I never really know how it will affect me before it happens, you know. The dreaded day always looming in the periphery, its dark call beckoning me into pits of mindless depravity and despair. If I wasn't so goddamn hungover, I'd find the depressing poetry of it quite breathtaking. "You can't sleep here, man," a scruffy-looking middle-aged man explained. "It's a fucking dumpster for Chris sakes." He was right. It was a dumpster, but I'd argue they make perfect makeshift beds when you're too drunk to find your way home. Or find anything. I was in no condition to put my point across, however, so I decided that, for the time being, I'd be better off following his unsolicited advice. "Where the fuck am I?" I mumbled, dragging my body over the edge of the dumpster and doing a terrible job of landing on my feet. "In fucking back alley, man. What does it look like?" "Looks like a fucking back alley," I said, "but I'm more interested in how I ended up here." He threw a couple of boxes filled with what, judging by the sound, was empty glass bottles into the dumpster and helped me get back on my feet. "The bouncer probably bounced you," he grinned toothlessly. "That's his job, you know." I nodded thoughtfully. That scenario definitely had me written all over it. I thanked the mysterious stranger by punching him in the nose and set out to find the assumed business of which I was forcibly removed from. I remember the first time I opened the envelope vividly, 19 years ago, almost to the day. For a long time I had been aware of how empty the house had become, how empty I had become. The envelope was just an envelope back then. Mail, no feelings attached to its dull, lifeless surface. The content sent shivers down my spine, vomit to the back of my mouth. I tried for years to hunt down the sender, but there was just nothing to go on. It's perhaps that particular aspect that bothers me the most, the fact that he finds me every year, regardless of identity and location. Or it could also be the content, or the Pavlovian reaction to the envelope's appearance. So many unanswered questions. I stopped outside what appeared to be a bar, the faded sign above the entrance stating that this was the House of Crazies, and that they held open from dusk till dawn. I possessed no electronic device in which to accurately predict time, but the sun, which was hovering mid-sky like a big old jerk, gave me the impression that it was before dusk and after dawn. The door was unlocked, however, so I sauntered in regardless. The surroundings seemed familiar, dark marble-like floor, polished and cold as steel, centered in which was a splendid mahogany bar counter, adorned by a dark red neon sign proclaiming that this was the blood station. Horror-inspired paintings and sculptures emphasized the ridiculously tasteless interior style, like a deformed dot over the gimmicky eye. A lanky young man stood behind the counter, grinning madly in my direction as I stumbled toward him, his incredibly shiny bald head only overshadowed by the amount of piercings dangling from it. "He said you'd be back," he gave me a weak nod. "Said you couldn't stay away." "Who?" I mumbled confusedly. "Do I fucking know you?" "Gave me $500 to tell you a story." "What the fuck are you talking about?" "The man with the envelope," he whispered hoarsely. "He said you'd know what that meant." I grabbed him by the neck, pulling him in real close. I'm assuming that my breath must have reeked of alcohol, vomit, death, and decay, because his otherwise cheery demeanor suddenly faded. "Where is he?" I demanded. "Who is he?" "Calm down, man," he whimpered. "He isn't here anymore. He just gave me the money and told me to tell you the story." I released my grip momentarily, the absurdity of the situation not lost on me. It all felt so familiar, though, like I'd been down this road before. "Story?" I asked. "What fucking story?" He shrugged. "Fuck if I know," he said. "He told me you'd understand, though." Go on then, I said, sitting down on a vacant bar stool. Bring me a bottle of scotch and lay it on me. From what I could gather, the main character of the story I was currently enjoying was either Denver, Dallas, Dodge, or Dirk. He was either extremely tall or unusually short and had blonde or black hair, or maybe he didn't. He was apparently anywhere between 20 and 50 years old, and was addicted to heroin, cocaine, alcohol, or some combination thereof. This Denver, Dallas, Dodge, or Dirk had a girlfriend named Donna. Together they injected, digested, possibly inhaled most of the drugs known to man, and generally did everything to avoid facing reality. Prostitution, petty theft, robbery, you name it. Down the line they'd naturally accumulated a sizable drug debt, one of which they were constantly struggling to pay off. Fingers were broken, black eyes applied, toenails removed, but to no avail. Addiction is a lifestyle you embrace, body and soul. Physical pain is easy. You can get used to that. Dealing with your own shitty life sober? Now that's the real torture right there. There came a time, though, when no one wanted to deal to them anymore. The rumor had spread to every drug dealer in the district. Absolutely no one wanted anything to do with the couple. The situation was precarious. Denver, Dallas, Dodge, or Dirk went out one night to make one last desperate attempt to score something. Several hours later, empty-handed, he returned to the cardboard box of a shithole they occupied, only to find a scene that would have sent him spiraling into madness if he wasn't already there. The place was in shambles, more than normal. Lamps broken, pillows torn open, couch upside down, tables in splinters, blood on the walls, ceiling and floor. And in the middle of it all, centered as a macabre art piece, Donna's body. Donna, already worn thin after several days without a fix, had completely freaked out. She'd trashed the place looking for any substance she could inject into her body, but found nothing. Hysterical and driven by torturous despair, she'd used a kitchen knife to cut her wrists without having had the right technique or luck to slice through any major arteries. A dozen wounds on each arm emphasized this fact. She had then stabbed 4 needles into her ear canals, 3 of which had penetrated the middle ear, while the 4th had found its way into the inner ear. She'd most likely tried to replace the physical and mental craving for drugs with extreme pain. It didn't work. We've been over this. It never works. She then went on to use a lighter to burn away every single hair on her body and also parts of her nose. According to the investigators who arrived first at the scene, the smell of burnt flesh lingered in the air. But it didn't stop there. Driven now by unrelenting madness and pain, she'd methodically begun to rip off pieces of her own flesh with her teeth. She concluded the extreme ceremony by digging out her left eyeball with a spoon, previously used to prepare heroin. The weird thing, though, was that the eyeball had disappeared without a trace. They couldn't find it anywhere. They figured she'd died from the blood loss, and gallons of it splashed across every inch of the place could definitely support this notion. The autopsy, on the other hand, unveiled that she had died from something as trivial as suffocation. And in her throat they found the cause. Yes, you guessed it, her eyeball. Well, that's just fucked up, I said drunkenly, having emptied the bottle of scotch during the tale. Seriously, man, what the fuck? Hey man, that's the story, he shrugged, the mad grin suddenly returning to his face. He said you'd understand. Well, I fucking don't, I snarled, tipping over the bottle childishly. Fuck you, I'm out of here. I don't know quite what I was expecting. A reaction? A veiled threat? An unveiled threat? Something. But he didn't even flinch, just smiled as I flipped him a finger and stumbled toward the exit. Before I left, though, I threw a glance back at him, a question lingering in the back of my mind forcing its way out. Hey, what was his name? What did he look like? The barkeep shrugged. Never gave me a name. Some old geezer, nothing special about him. Real sad eyes, though. I nodded and dropped $100 bill on the floor. Thanks, I muttered as I left. The sky was dark, the big old jerk of a sun all but covered by depressing clouds. I stumbled back to my shitty residence, this time around an abandoned cabin, in the pouring rain contemplating the surreal story. It wasn't true, was it? Could it be? The world is a fucked up place, populated almost exclusively by fucked up people. Anything can be true, and nothing can be true. I crashed on the couch the moment I found it, the dreamless sleep by this point my only escape from the acidic shithole of my puke-black mind. There are no winners in life, I noted pseudo-philosophically. Just fucked up people in a fucked up existence. I don't know how long I was out, but I knew it didn't matter. I woke up precisely when I was meant to. Was there a knock? Maybe a slight poke to my ribs? A whisper in my ear? I can't really say, but I jolted awake possessed by a very familiar feeling of dread. The front door was wide open, a fresh set of muddy boot prints running all the way to the couch and back again. A single item left behind. The only thing in this shit life I truly feared, loathed, despised, the envelope. I grabbed it with trembling fingers. I wanted nothing more than to just throw it away, dispose of it, forget it ever existed. But I never could bring myself to do it. I always had to open it, like some junkie craving his next fix of gruesome morbidity. The content dropped onto the floor like so many times before. It was never identical, but it always caused me to double over in disgust. A severed finger this year, deformed, blackish in complexion, only vaguely humanoid. The unmistakable stench of death entered my nostrils almost immediately, and I instinctively buried my face in my sleeve. Always a body part. A severed piece of someone, of something. A reminder? A threat? These are the questions that have haunted me for 19 years. But this time it was different. This time the envelope contained more. A simple handwritten note. I don't know if you've ever received body parts on a regular basis, but it can really do a number on you, psychologically speaking. For me, I'd argue it was even worse, because I had no idea why or who, both valid questions, the answers to which had eluded me for almost 2 decades now. It takes a toll on you. That's why we have alcohol, I always figured. After burying the severed finger half a mile into the woods, I headed into town to find a nice, dark, and reclusive spot to drown my anxious sorrows. Normally I'd move on fairly quickly, but the added surprise of the sinister note had really gotten under my skin, and I wasn't capable of dealing with that sober just yet. I needed time. Time, and some sort of plan. Time, some sort of plan, and alcohol. I didn't feel like hanging around the rowdy crowd at the House of Crazies, so I'd instead located a really shitty den of trash in some godforsaken alley, the alluring worn-down stink pit, exactly the kind of aesthetique I was looking for. "Fill her up," I mumbled, waving my glass around, "and leave the bottle. In fact, leave several bottles." I'd already emptied a bottle or two of something vaguely brownish, and I'd no intention of quitting just yet. "You should consider quitting," a squeaky voice called from behind. I turned around slowly, only to fall off my ridiculously tall barstool moments later, laughing my ass off. Wait, I gasped, stumbling to my feet clumsily. "Don't tell me." "Tell you what?" the incredibly short man with the squeaky voice asked. "Yeah, what?" The incredibly tall man accompanying the incredibly short man with the squeaky voice joined in. "Your names, don't tell me, let me guess," I said. "Denver, Dallas, Dodge, or Dirk?" The incredibly tall man stared at me for a moment before saying, "I'm Dodge, he's Dirk." He nodded in the direction of the incredibly short person. "Why?" he asked confusedly. "Out of curiosity, and bear with me, where do the two of you hail from?" "What? Where are you from?" He kept staring at me. I couldn't identify the look on his face as neither angry nor confused, which made me angry and confused. "I'm from Dallas, he's from Denver, but I don't know what that has." "Please, bear with me just a little while longer." I gasped between the laughter and hiccups. I could now identify Dodge's look as both angry, confused, and offended, a nice triumvirate of expressions. After calming them down by offering them some of my vaguely brownish, presumably alcoholic liquid, I told them the story from House of Crazies as best I could remember. "It's an urban myth," Dirk suggested after I'd finished the tantalizing tale. "Anti-drug propaganda aimed at teenagers. I've also heard it, or a version of it, except the male character was named Hans or Gruber, and was a German immigrant, and that he was either extremely thin or unusually, heavy. I knew a girl once named Lena Gruber," I mumbled. Dodge informed me that he'd had a preschool teacher who happened to be named Donna, and that an accident with a glue stick was the closest he'd been to substance abuse. Dirk, on the other hand, that tiny little deviant, admitted to messing around with pot in his youth, and even blushed slightly as he came clean about this atrocity. "We've all been young," he apologized. "I've heard another story, too." Dodge poured himself another glass of sludgy mess. "Kind of reminds me of yours. I nodded. I'm all about stories these days, it would seem, I said. Lay it on me. The heroine, so to speak, in the story was apparently named Sally, Sandra, Susie, or Jenna, and was in the profession that's rumored to be the oldest in history. She was a whore, I guess the term is, or prostitute, sex worker, selling her body for money, which in turn she wasted on certain substances used primarily as a way of escaping reality. Anyway, this person, let's just call her Sally, one day found out she was pregnant. Her somewhat meager monthly salary, combined with the fact that she was only 19 years old, made it quite obvious that she couldn't keep the offspring, but at the same time, she didn't want to have an abortion. Quite the predicament. As would-be mothers most, she wanted the child to have a better life. Thus adoption seemed like the only choice. The problem was that she didn't trust the system. None of them did. I suppose that was her first real mistake, confiding in her pimp. He was a good guy after all, deep, deep, deep down. He told her he might know someone who could help her. Since he was so nice and all, he agreed to arrange a meeting with the someone, and he was sure, positive, that everything would turn out just fine, and that she'd be back on the streets in no time. He told her he loved her, before beating her up for being stupid enough to get pregnant in the first place. Good guy, The next day he took her to the meeting place, an abandoned farmhouse about 3 miles outside the city. A swanky rustic place, old money kind of rich. They met the mysterious someone, introduced to her as simply Reynolds, a middle-aged, handsome smooth talker. He told her how beautiful she was, how the pregnancy made her glow, and all that jazz, and that he had the perfect family in mind for the child. She didn't have to worry about a thing. He'd take care of the details, sign the documents, and in return for selflessly giving away her own blood, she'd never want for anything again. He whispered into her ear that everything was going to be all right, and that 9 months from now a new life would be waiting for her. She cried that night. Deep, uncontrollable sobs. It was the first time she wept tears of joy. Flash forward 9 months, and the baby was due. Reynolds was present for the birth, and even though it was especially painful, they pumped her full of drugs so she dreamed through most of it. She'd experienced worse after all. Much, much worse. After 10 hours of labor, the child came into the world, a perfectly healthy baby boy. Reynolds smiled at her, told her how brave and strong she was, that the baby was lovely, almost as beautiful as she was. For the second time in her life, she wept tears of joy. She called her father that night, explained that she was sorry for everything, begged for forgiveness, asked if she could come back home. She smiled when her father told her that of course she could come back home. She gently drifted off after the conversation, overcome by an unfamiliar feeling, a sweet sensation of happiness. It wouldn't last, of course. These things never do. She jolted awake in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat. The drugs still had a good grip on her head, but she imagined hearing screams coming from the first floor. She stumbled to her feet and let the worst of the lightheadedness pass, before making her way down the stairs. It seemed like an eternity of pain and nausea, but somehow she made it. Voices echoed down the dark hallway, and she quickly realized they came from the kitchen. She didn't want to cause any trouble, but she couldn't help but to overhear parts of the conversation. And over the femur. As long as it's fresh. She moved stealthily toward the voices, until she could see Reynolds standing over the kitchen table, conversing with a short figure dressed in filthy rags. She almost let out a shriek of fear when she saw the figure's face, the horrid appearance nothing short of nightmarish. He bore an unmistakable resemblance to a murderous rat. Long, pointy, curved nose, cheekbones more or less non-existent, thin lips locked in a malicious half-smile. His forehead was far too short, and his dirty brown hair was wild, a spiky mess atop the crooked skull. But the worst thing was the eyes, sunken violent pearls of black. In a claw-like right hand he held a blood-stained knife, of which he moved up and down in slow, methodical movements, each time adorning the crude blade with fresh blood. She crept a little closer, and could now vaguely make out a shape on the table. A horrible thought entered her mind. It couldn't be. No, it was unthinkable. She crept closer, ever closer, her hands trembling, head spinning. As she realized what she was witnessing, she began screaming uncontrollably, her worst nightmares becoming reality. She screamed and screamed and screamed until there came no more sound. Then, driven by an all-consuming fear and madness, she ran out of the house and didn't stop until she was miles into the dark forest. And even then she stopped only because her legs could no longer carry her. She crawled under a tree and cried for hours. Predominant, the grotesque asceticism inevitable. She thought of the methodical, almost android-like movement of the knife, up and down, into blood-dripping flesh, and the sight of dead eyes, staring into her soul, stabbing her in the heart, and the sight of a newborn human body, all carved up and sliced to pieces. Finally, the sound of a hoarse whispering voice escaping thin lips dripping with fresh blood. 3 to 5 hours, the rat-like nightmare said. They taste best 3 to 5 hours after birth. Well, fuck me, I mumbled into my drink. The stories around these parts are messed up. You gotta be pretty fucked in the head to make that shit up. It's not, Dodge said. Not what? I asked, staring up at the giant. It's not made up, the squeaky-voiced Dirk chimed in. He told us you'd understand. Before I could answer, before I could put 2 and 2 together, I was on the ground again, this time not of my own doing. Dodge was sat on top of me, his knees locking my arms in place, and Dirk was hovering inches above my face. You need to remember, Monk, Dirk said. He needs you to remember. He stuffed something down my shirt and nodded to Dodge. One more story, Dodge said. Then it's all over. I felt him grabbing onto my fingers, and even though I did everything I could to get him the fuck off of me, he didn't even move an inch. I'm sorry about this, Dodge said. I really am. Nothing personal, you see. Just business. He pulled my fingers back with a violent jerk, and I could hear a loud snap as they either broke or dislocated. I wanted to scream, and I'm pretty sure I did, but the intensity of the pain was just too much, so I must have passed out more or less instantly. I woke up in a dumpster hours later. Interestingly enough, I've woken up in dumpsters more times than I've been in serious relationships. There's a lesson in there somewhere, I'm sure of it. I struggled to get out of it once again, this time because of the intense pain in my fingers. Broken, dislocated, I didn't fucking know, but it hurt like hell. As I tumbled to the ground, my ribs taking most of the impact from the fall, I remembered something. I reached into my shirt, finding the papery object Dirk had been so kind to stuff in there. An envelope, identical to the other 19 I'd gotten over the years. It felt much the same too, that extra bit of weight that normally shouldn't be there. I closed my eyes and emptied the content on the ground, a disgusting squish sending shivers down my spine. I slowly opened my eyes again, gaze drawn to the macabre mess before me. Lips, human lips, crudely severed, still bloody, still fresh, and a simple handwritten note. There was only one word written on it, and it said, "Remember." All written in big letters, trying to emphasize the message. A bloody bunch of body parts, comically sized goons, and stories so fucked up they'll make even the looniest serial killer wince. It had been an interesting couple of days, to say the least. An interesting couple of decades, too. And now it was all presumably about to come tumbling down on me. I sat by the dumpster staring at the note. Remember, remember was all it said, now echoing in my head. There's a lot I remember. More still that I don't. I guess living on a diet consisting of 81.2% alcohol will do that to you. Leave gaps where there should be faces, holes where there should be persons. What the fuck was I missing? I could remember every detail about every body part I'd woefully received over the years, and I could remember straining my mind until I passed out, desperately searching for answers to the why. But had I thoroughly investigated the who? Not the who as in who sent it, but the who as in whose body parts had I been burying all over the country. Lena. I couldn't stop thinking about her after Dirk mentioned the name Gruber, her father's surname. Was it a coincidence? Did I even believe in coincidences anymore? I stumbled to my feet, kicking the note and severed lips into a filthy corner behind the dumpster. I suppose the rats could have this one. No time to bury body parts today. I needed a clear mind, so instead of choking on vaguely brownish, presumably alcoholic liquid, I bought a bottle of vodka, which I carefully sipped on while lurking in the shadows outside the House of Crazies. There was something in the story Dodge told that had got me thinking. A small detail that had escaped me, but which was now scratching at my memory relentlessly. Lena. I hadn't even considered her, you know. We were a thing a couple of years before I started getting the body parts, and even though we ended on fairly bad terms, I just couldn't fathom that any of this had anything to do with her. I'd been shuffling in the shadows, chain smoking and vodka sipping for about 2 hours when I saw him exit the House of Crazies. He was an easy man to spot, old Dodge, because, well, you really couldn't miss him. That's how I found him in the first place. Turns out there weren't that many lean giants named Dodge around these parts. I had a plan this time, but it was a stupid one. Immensely stupid, as circumstances would have it. I followed him as stealthily as my alcohol-fueled body could muster for a few blocks, until I saw him getting into a parked car. I knew this was my only shot, so instead of thinking about it, which I probably should have, I sprung into action, tore open the passenger door, pulled out my knife, and sat down pointing the sharp end of it in Dodge's general direction. "I need some fucking answers, man," I said. "You owe me that much." Dodge didn't flinch, his towering frame bent over in a weird angle and able to fit somewhat comfortably in the car. There aren't that many car models accommodating people with vertical challenges, you know. Really makes you think. "Monk," he said calmly. "You shouldn't have come here." "Fuck you," I snarled, waving the knife around threateningly. "You don't get to decide that." "Fine," he sighed, trying to lean back nonchalantly. "What do you want to know, Monk?" "Sally," I said, still waving the knife around. "The woman from your story. What happened to her?" "This truly baffles me," Dodge said, a sly smile manifesting on his lips. "I didn't believe it at first. Couldn't. It's like completing an infinite jigsaw puzzle, blindfolded without fingers, and with the pieces scattered randomly around the world. It shouldn't be doable. Should be impossible. But here you are." "What the fuck are you talking about?" I yelled, this time poking the knife into his shoulder. "What happened to her?" "She died," he said. "Killed herself in the hospital. Banged her head against a bedpost until there just wasn't anything left. I highly doubt there was anything to save to begin with. No one comes back from what she went through." I nodded thoughtfully. The infinite jigsaw puzzle was slowly starting to come together. Lena, Donna, Sally. How did I not connected the dots earlier? "Hang on," I said, loud warning signals suddenly going off in my mind. "What did you mean about the jigsaw puzzle?" He meant, a hoarse voice suddenly called from behind me, that he didn't believe you'd be stupid enough to follow him here. Before I could make a move, I felt a thin metal wire wrap around my throat. I was able to get a finger or two in between before it tightened, but the intensity of the attack nearly cut right through them as the unseen assailant pulled back the wire with ferocious vigor. "Calm down, Monk," he whispered hoarsely. "I'll release it when you calm down. One more story, remember?" Remember. I remembered. A fucked up summer with Lena. Constantly on a wonderful high or depressing low, sleeping on the streets, pissing and shitting in filthy back alleys, the creeping sensation of despair as I realized we were slowly degenerating into human junkie trash. I raised my free arm and dropped the knife to signal that I was calm as a cucumber, and let out a pained sigh as I felt the wire loosen moments later. "You're him, aren't you?" I gasped. "You're Lena's father?" "I am, Monk," his raspy voice crept into my ears, "and it's time you heard her story." I nodded weakly, my gaze wandering to the rearview mirror. All I could see of him were the eyes, hateful, sad, filled with dark, somber grief. The story started some 20 years ago, and we've just opened the final chapter now. The man was happy. He had 3 daughters, and he was proud of them all. Their mother, his wife, succumbed to cancer while they were still fairly young, and he had since done everything he could to give his children the life they deserved, the life their mother had wanted for them. And the children grew up to make him proud. His eldest went to law school to become a seeker of justice, a defender of the poor and hapless. The second daughter landed a promising position at a major publishing company, and the youngest was still in high school. She wanted to become a journalist like her mother when things changed. The eldest daughter fell in love. This was a good thing, of course. Everyone deserves to experience love. But it led her down a path that she'd never come back from. A life in ruin and despair that ultimately cost her everything she had. School, friends, family. In just a few months she rotted away, and everything she held dear that held her dear was taken from her. By you. Hey man, that's not fair, I interrupted. She had a say in it too, you know. We're not done, Monk. Everything was taken from her, and then you left. Left her alone on the merciless streets to rot away alone. It broke her, you know. She was already broken, but you made certain to leave her unfixable. What the fuck do you mean? I spat. Yeah, I left. It happens. I feel shitty about it, but it happens. She was pregnant, Monk. You knew that. That's why you left. Left her alone to slowly destroy herself and the child. She was so cold when they found her. Icy blue complexion, foam at her mouth, gangrenous wounds all over her frail body. So she died? I asked. You're blaming me for her death? She held on for 6 months, in and out of consciousness, but her mind was fractured, a jumbled mess, oozing madness and contempt. She held on, Monk, until she gave birth, and then she killed herself. Stuck a pair of scissors into her brain. She wouldn't stop screaming your name. That's the only thing I can allow myself to remember of those final months. Your name. Look, I'm sorry, but I never meant to. We're not done. Following in the wake of her death, her sisters, unable to process the tragedy, fell into the same bottomless pit of despair. Drugs, prostitution, endless cycles of self-inflicted torture. I'm hoping this makes sense to you now. They all died, Monk. Swallowed by the maelstrom of rot and decay you left behind. All my daughters were taken from me. Lena, Donna, Sally, their deaths are all on you. You took everything from me, and I've spent a lifetime making sure you pay for it. Piece by piece, I've chipped away at your sanity, until nothing was left but the alcoholic, filthy, decomposing parody of a human we see here today. I don't understand those body parts. Oh, you understand. I know you do. But we're just getting to that, Monk. But not here. Not now. I have something very special planned for you. I felt the needle enter my neck, and then instant pressure as the liquid was forced into my bloodstream. Moments later, my eyes failed me, my mind disappeared into the comfort of the black void, and I dreamt happily of my very favorite thing, nothingness. I woke up tied to a chair, hands, legs, bound so tight it fucking hurt like hell. The place was dark, but I could tell by the echoing sounds of water dripping that it had to be pretty spacious. Maybe an abandoned factory storage, I figured. Here we are, Monk, the old man's raspy voice echoed, at the very end of the story. But I heard something else too. Heavy breathing, a low feral growl, squishy footsteps. Time at last to face your creation, he said, a loud screeching sound accompanying his raspy monologue. Time at last to meet your daughter. How many wandered into the hopeless black of the abyss, never to return, all because of a summer fling some 20 years ago? Donna, Sally, Lena, the old man. My daughter? My head was spinning. Not that I wasn't used to that. It was when it stopped spinning, I knew I was in trouble. It was when I faced reality sober, I knew how much I loathed it, how much I loathed myself. So the envelopes, I muttered. The body parts. I swallowed deeply. The mere thought of it was fucked up beyond comprehension. The sadism, the brutal madness of it, the meticulous depravity behind it. Yes, Monk, the old man said from somewhere in the darkness. Tiny keepsakes for your fatherly pleasure, a way for you to get to know your daughter intimately. The first few parts I received were unrecognizable, small shrunken pieces of blackened tissue. It took 4 or 5 years for me to even acknowledge what they were. And I suppose I knew deep down, you know, knew the reason why they kept getting bigger every year. The squishy footsteps were getting closer. I caught movement in my periphery, but it promptly disappeared into the darkness again, like an animal lurking, sniffing, carefully assessing its prey. You're fucking insane, I said, sweat dripping down my brow. You're a fucking maniac. Somewhere in the darkness, I heard a low growl. There was nothing even remotely human about it. She was already broken, Monk. Not even the doctors could stomach the sight of her. She was never meant to live, but through her beautiful sacrifice, I could at least make it right. I could at least enact some manner of punishment. A brief scent of death and decay, the echoing squishy squashy of horrid feet. You have to listen to man, I whispered. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know. Did I? Was it a lie? Truth be told, my memory was like a Swiss cheese, foreign and yellow, all tunneled out by fetid maggots, the remains unreliable and decomposing. Even if I did know, I didn't. She yelled your name, Monk, for months on end, a single word, and in the bitter end, that's all the proof I really need. I caught a glimpse of her at last. A split second of true horror. of pale skin and gangrenous flesh, of drool and pus and piss. There were 3 of us in that place, but there wasn't a single soul between us to share. I never loved my granddaughter. Who in their right mind would? But I loved the idea of what I could shape her into. She's a work of art, Monk, just like you. Manifestations of pure putrefaction, one of body, the other of mind. Combined, you are my magnum opus, tangible metaphors for my ceaseless torment. I could feel her breath on the back of my neck. She was close, edging closer, ever closer. I'll fucking kill you, I spat. You're a fucking monster. I didn't even think twice about it. I knew the moment I saw her what her purpose would be. She can't be innocent, Monk. She's got your genes after all. So I sliced her open, cut off pieces, tore off limbs, and made damn sure she felt every little prod, every little shriek, wail, whimper, scream. Just another tiny bit of justice, carefully packaged and sent your way. He laughed darkly. A deep cackling noise, the kind where you know what little sanity was ever there is now long gone, replaced by unfiltered madness. She smells it on you, the bond, the blood. She is confused because I always told her you were a dangerous man, a destroyer of lives. She doesn't understand that your strength is being weak, that your superpower is being powerless, that the genius of your actions is caused by the daftness of your dulled addict mind, that you wreak havoc by simply not being there when needed. You are the anti-villain, Monk, and that makes you a worthless adversary, but an adversary nonetheless. You are unlife, and unlife is you. Claw-like fingers ran down the back of my head, prodding me inquisitively, the stench of her now unbearable. Fuck you, old man, I snarled. You don't fucking know me. You've spent the last 19 years consumed by hatred, aimed at nothing. I am nothing. A man, a shadow, an anonymous nobody. You should have just moved on, because you won't find any solace in the removal of a piss stain like me. Don't be so sure, Monk. This is all I have now. Ending it will ultimately end me, and that's all I really want. You, me, and Tumour, all swallowed by non-existence. Tumour? I asked. Oh, that's her name, you see. She's your Tumour, Tumour. Her lumpy blackness will devour you whole. A hand at my ear, oozing with foul liquid. A freshly infected wound, I suspected. A gurgling sound as her mouth moved up my neck. Then she was gone again. But enough with the chit-chat. It's been nice catching up with you, Monk. But I should leave you two alone now. A father-daughter reunion. I bet you have a lot to discuss. A hollow metallic screech permeated the air, more than likely the sound of a massive door closing. I'll see you on the other side, Monk, the old man yelled. A loud bang then, as the door slammed shut, leaving 2 horribly broken creatures to figure shit out. Hey, I whispered. I'm sorry. I didn't know. She slowly approached me from the depths of the darkness, and for the first time I was allowed a good look at her gruesomely deformed figure. Shit, I muttered. Fuck. She was pale as snow, but also black as the night. Her lumpy, misshapen body was littered with black cysts and wounds, dripping with pus and sickening fluids. Her eyes was sunken deep into her disfigured skull, nothing but tiny black shining pearls. Her lipless mouth hung open, brown rotting teeth dripping with drool, a horrifying gurgling growl creeping into my ears as she edged towards me. No, please, I said. I'm not what he says I am. I didn't know if she could understand me, if she could hear at all. She was missing so many things. Fingers, toes, ears, nose, not a single part of her naked body left unscathed. Scars and festering wounds stretching across the lumpy grayish surface her skin. He is a hateful fucker, I whispered. A fucking monster. You don't have to become him. She crept closer, swinging her head from side to side like an animal, deep growls and snarls accompanying the squishy sounds of her rotting feet on cold concrete. I knew what would happen before it happened. As I took my eyes off her for just a moment, she suddenly charged me with wild animalistic ferocity. I felt my ears strain to block out the awful scream echoing through the vast empty space. Horrible, tortured howls lasting for minutes. And it wasn't until the very end that I realized that it was my own panicked vocal cords that, driven by complete fear, culminated in pathetic, convulsing shrieks. I imagine hearing a maniacal laughter from somewhere in that god-forsaken tomb before everything exploded in violence. Then everything turned black. I'm not sure what he expected. That I would roll over and play dead? That I would just sit there and let my nightmarish daughter rip me to pieces? Or did he plan this all along? The ramshackle chair I was tied to shattered the moment we hit the ground. A few seconds later, and I had her malformed head locked in a chokehold. Just a little twist, and her neck snapped like a twig. Didn't take much force either. She was lethargic, malnourished, nothing but skin or bones. Driven into a mad blood frenzy through years of unspeakable torture, sure, but frail and feeble nonetheless. I stood over her body for minutes, tears streaming down my face. I didn't know her. I never got to. But no one deserves this, not even him. Well, maybe him. I staggered around in the darkness for a while before I found the exit and winced as the metallic screech of the door signaled my escape. Stagger on, I thought, as I entered a small, cramped room, some sort of office. At the far end of it, a single lamp was lit, illuminating a very distinctive-looking envelope laid out on a table. "Fuck me," I muttered as I gently lifted the thing between my thumb and index. It wasn't heavy like the others. No hidden puzzle piece in the shape of a bloody body part. I emptied the content on the table and took a step back instinctively. You know that feeling you get when you are out of options? When you've come at a problem from all angles and still haven't gotten anywhere? Resignation, I guess? Hopelessness? Despair? I guess there are many words for it. I think I knew the moment I saw her that something wasn't right, that something was missing. Or not missing, I suppose. All you have to do is count, right? Tally up the body parts. Easy math. I stared at the crude handwriting above the sonogram. Tumour and cyst, identical twins. I don't know what he wants me to do. Kill myself? Or does he want me to go on? To keep drifting endlessly, the pain and anguish turning septic, seeping into my mind, tainting my every thought, rotting from the inside out. I don't know. I just know that I can't stop. Won't stop. There has to be a way out. Salvation, peace, justice. If not for me, then for my remaining daughter. For my cyst. I'll see you next year, yeah? We'll crack open a cold one. Doesn't have to be cold, though. Lukewarm is fine, too. But you'll be there? Yeah? I'll see you then, on my daughter's birthday. And then, maybe we can open the envelope together